You wake up one morning and everything just feels heavy. Not tired heavy, not sick heavy. Something else entirely. Like the world lost a little bit of its colour overnight and you can't quite figure out when it happened or why. If you've ever felt that way, this video is for you, because today we're going to talk about something that nobody really wants to admit they need to hear. Why are you actually sad? And I mean actually, not the surface level stuff, the real reasons hiding underneath. Let's start with something that might surprise you. Most people who feel sad don't know why they're sad. And that's not a character flaw. That's not weakness. That is one of the most human experiences that exists. You can be sitting in a perfectly fine life, good job, people who love you, food on the table, and still feel this quiet ache that you cannot explain. And because you can't explain it, you start to feel guilty on top of the sadness, like you have no right to feel this way. That guilt makes the sadness worse. And now you're in this loop that most people spend years trapped inside. Here's the first thing you need to understand. Sadness is not always a response to something that just happened. Sometimes sadness is a delayed reaction. Something happened 6 months ago, 2 years ago, maybe even a decade ago, and you never fully processed it. You moved on because life required you to move on. You had responsibilities. You had people depending on you. You kept going. And the sadness just got stored somewhere in the back of your mind like an unpacked box in a house you moved into years ago. Eventually, that box starts to take up space even when you're not looking at it. That unprocessed grief, that unacknowledged loss, that's one of the most common invisible sources of sadness that people carry around without realizing it. Now let's talk about something even deeper, disconnection. And I don't mean social media disconnection, though we'll get there. I mean the feeling of being disconnected from yourself, from who you actually are versus who you've been pretending to be. A lot of sadness comes from living a life that doesn't match your inner values. You're spending your days doing things that don't feel meaningful to you. You're being someone that other people need you to be, rather than someone that you actually want to be. And after enough time, that gap between your real self and the version of you that shows up every day starts to create this dull, persistent sadness that you can't shake because it's not coming from outside of you. It's coming from within. And here's where it gets really important. Most of us were never taught how to identify this kind of thing. We weren't given emotional vocabulary as kids. We were told to toughen up, stop crying, think positive, keep moving. So we grew into adults who have all of these complex inner experiences, but absolutely no framework for understanding them. You feel sad, and your first instinct is to fix the sadness rather than listen to it. Because what if the sadness is actually trying to tell you something? Think about physical pain for a second. When your body hurts, pain is a signal, is telling you something is wrong. You don't just take a painkiller and pretend the signal isn't there, at least not if you're being smart about it. But with emotional pain, most of us do exactly that. We numb it, we scroll, we work more, we drink, we stay busy. We binge, watch shows at 2 a.m. because silence feels dangerous. We avoid the message the sadness is trying to send us. And that avoidance, ironically, is one of the biggest things that keeps the sadness alive. So here's a question worth sitting with. What would your sadness say if it could talk? Not what's causing it, but what it is trying to tell you about your life. Maybe it's telling you that you've been ignoring a relationship that matters to you. Maybe it's telling you that the career path you're on isn't actually what you wanted. Maybe it's telling you that you've been performing a version of yourself for so long that you've actually lost track of who you are without the performance. These are uncomfortable things to hear, but discomfort that leads to understanding is always more valuable than comfort that leads to stagnation. Let's zoom out for a moment, because there are also external forces at play that we genuinely need to acknowledge. The world we're living in right now is genuinely difficult in ways that previous generations didn't face in the same way. Constant information overload, the pressure of social comparison amplified by platforms that were literally designed by engineers to maximize the amount of time you spend feeling inadequate, the economic uncertainty that makes people feel like no matter how hard they work, they're always just a few bad weeks away from instability, the loneliness epidemic that researchers have been sounding the alarm about for years. These are real. These are not things you imagined. And feeling sad in response to a genuinely hard environment is not irrational. It's honest. But here is where we have to be careful. Because acknowledging external factors is healthy. Using them as permanent excuses is a different thing. The goal is not to say the world is hard, therefore I am helpless. The goal is to say the world is hard and I need to understand how it's affecting me so I can respond with intention rather than just react unconsciously. one of the most underrated sources of sadness is the stories we tell ourselves about our own lives. We are all constantly narrating our experience. You didn't get the promotion, and the story you tell yourself is, I'm not good enough. Someone didn't text back, and the story becomes, nobody really cares about me. You made a mistake, and the story turns into, I always mess things up. These stories feel like facts. They don't feel like stories, but they are stories. They are interpretations. And when those interpretations are consistently negative, when they always cast you as the person who fails, who isn't enough, who never gets what they want, that narrative creates sadness as surely as any external event. This is where something fascinating happens in the brain. When we believe a negative story about ourselves strongly enough, we actually start to look for evidence that confirms it. You filter out the moments that contradict the story and amplify the moments that support it. The brain is essentially running a confirmation bias algorithm in the background of your life. And once you see that mechanism happening, you can start to interrupt it, not by forcing yourself to think positively. That doesn't work. But by questioning the story, by asking yourself whether it's actually the only interpretation available. Here's another dimension of this that most people overlook: suppressed anger. There is a well-documented relationship between unexpressed anger and depression and sadness. When we experience something unfair, something painful, something that violates our sense of how things should be, anger is often the natural first response. But many people, especially people who are raised to be agreeable, or to keep the peace, or to always be the one who holds it together, don't allow themselves to feel that anger. They swallow it. And swallowed anger doesn't disappear. It transforms. It converts into sadness, into numbness, into a kind of tired hopelessness that can be very hard to trace back to its original source. So if you've been feeling sad for a while and you can't quite figure out why, one of the questions worth asking is whether there's anger underneath it. Not anger you need to act on necessarily, but anger you need to acknowledge. Anger that's waiting to be felt so it can pass through rather than sit inside you like a stone. Now let's talk about the people in your life, because relationships, or the absence of them, are central to so much human sadness. And not just romantic relationships, the friendships that have quietly faded, the family dynamics that never got resolved, the conversations you needed to have that you kept putting off until the opportunity closed, the people you wanted to be closer to, but you didn't know how to close the distance. Human beings are fundamentally wired for connection, and any kind of disconnection, whether it's physical separation or emotional distance, registers in our nervous system as a genuine threat. That sense of not being truly known by anyone, of going through the motions of interaction without ever really being seen, that loneliness that hides inside otherwise social lives, is one of the most pervasive, quiet sources of sadness in modern existence. And here's the painful irony: the sadder you feel, the harder it becomes to connect, because sadness often makes people withdraw. You stop reaching out because you don't want to be a burden. You start to feel like your real state of mind is something you need to hide from the people around you. So you present a version of yourself that's fine, that's coping, that's managing. And the performance of being okay actually deepens the very disconnection that's contributing to the sadness. It becomes a self-reinforcing cycle that takes real courage to break. So how do you break it? This is the part of the conversation that matters most. You start by giving yourself permission to stop performing, just with one person. One conversation where you stop saying, I'm fine, when you're not. That moment of vulnerability, as terrifying as it feels, is usually the exact moment when real connection becomes possible. The person on the other side doesn't need you to be okay. They need you to be honest. And more often than not, your honesty gives them permission to be honest too. Beyond that, the practice of actually sitting with sadness, rather than running from it, is genuinely transformative. This doesn't mean indulging it endlessly. It means giving it space. It means asking what it needs. It means treating it as information rather than as an enemy to defeat. Journaling is one of the most underrated tools for this, because writing forces you to articulate what you're feeling, and articulation is the beginning of understanding. Therapy, when accessible, is one of the most powerful things a person can invest in. Not because something is broken in you, but because having a trained person help you map your own inner landscape is genuinely valuable. Movement matters too, not as a cure, but as a practice that reconnects you with your body when sadness has been entirely in your head. Time in nature. Reduction in the amount of information you're consuming. Protecting your sleep. These are not small things, they are foundational things that create the conditions in which healing becomes possible. Here's the truth that I want to leave you with. Sadness is not the enemy. Sadness is a part of being fully alive. It's one of the indicators that you are a person who cares, who feels, who is paying attention to the fact that things matter. The problem is never feeling sad. The problem is feeling sad without understanding it, feeling sad without giving it the dignity of your attention, feeling sad while simultaneously judging yourself for feeling it. You are not broken because you're sad. You are not weak. You are not ungrateful. You are not failing at life. You are a human being navigating a complex inner and outer world, and your sadness is one of the most honest things about you right now. The question isn't how to make it disappear immediately. The question is what it's trying to tell you. And if you're willing to ask that question, to really sit with it, to listen without flinching, then the sadness becomes something extraordinary. It becomes a doorway, not into more pain, into a deeper, truer version of the life you actually want to be living. That's where the real work begins. And that's where things actually start to change.